I'd express it that it's something to take into account, is the way that I expressed it. Again, it all goes to the weight that you put onto that. For me, it wasn't something, I've noted it because it's in the documents, but it wasn't something that persuaded me. We didn't, I'm not saying to the inspector, we only passed the test because I'm relying on those elements. I'm just saying it's something else to take into consideration. As far as I'm concerned, we passed the tests very squarely in relation to the qualifying features and the conservation objectives as I've put them to the inspector.
Okay, thank you. So just building on that, because I think maybe our interpretation of doing these assessments is perhaps different in terms of what we would take into consideration. Hopefully you won't mind if I kind of draw an analogy and seek your views on it. I hope it's not too kind of reductionist, but I think a kind of short thought experiment might be helpful in this case. So the analogy, I guess, is if I were to, say, go to the park for a picnic and there's the potential for me to leave a lot of rubbish lying around, that's my environmental harm in this case. There are two potential routes for dealing with that. One, which I think is analogous to the agency's stance, would be I could mitigate for that by taking a bag to bring that rubbish home in. The other route, which I think is the equivalent of what you're suggesting, is I can leave that rubbish lying around because there happens to be an active community litter picking scheme that will compensate for my environmental harm in that way. I suppose my question that remains there really is, do you see the parallels in that analogy and that one is the right course of action over the other?
I think what I'm going to say to that is no, I don't see the parallels. The parallel would be you picking all your litter up from the park, but nonetheless the local planning authority having provided litter bins that you could put in.
Okay, so I guess the parallel in the appellant's case would be me leaving the rubbish lying around for the initiative to pick up would be analogous, I think, to allowing, for example, the killing of shad via entrapment, because someone else is doing a really good job of improving their habitat linkages. And I think the linkage there with sort of game theory and the tragedy of the commons is quite clear, and there's a real risk there.
I'm sorry, but Mr. Chair, I just don't agree with those kind of analogies. I've expressed it very clearly that the main test should be done against the features for which the site was designated. I think I would have been criticised by the Environment Agency and indeed by you if I'd have then towed the line that actually the Commission tells us that should be the sole limit of where we need to assess. What I've said is there are other things to take into account. And in fairness to me, when Mr. Malls has asked me about various things like conservation status, whether it's in favourable condition, all of those I've expressed should be taken into consideration. But our baseline, as we understand it from the documents, is that many of these fish have been put in unfavourable condition just simply on a precautionary basis. Now, I'm not saying there's necessarily anything wrong with that approach. It depends on how many more layers of precaution there are. But all I'm saying is there are some factors that I think it's worthwhile the inspector or me drawing to the inspector's note when there are things going on that might change that base level, and therefore you might think differently about something. That's all. I definitely am not in a scenario of saying either that we rely on those measures to pass the tests, so that is definitely not the case. And secondly, I don't agree with your analogy that, it's all right to kill things because someone else is going to do something better further upstream. That's nothing to do with any of the suggestions that I've made.
Okay, thank you for that. That's it. Thank you, Inspector.